Margaret Harper had lived a full life. At 68, she thought she'd seen everything. She'd raised 3 children alone after her husband passed, worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, and found joy in the small victories. Her youngest son, David, had married a woman named Vanessa 5 years ago. Margaret had welcomed her with open arms, the way she welcomed everyone. Margaret lived in the small guest house behind David and Vanessa's property. It was a peaceful arrangement. She had her independence, her garden, her quiet mornings with coffee and birds singing. David checked on her daily, and Vanessa would bring her fresh bread on Sundays. That Tuesday afternoon, Margaret came home earlier than usual. Her book club had been canceled. As she walked through the main house to get to her guest quarters, a shortcut David always encouraged her to use, she heard voices upstairs. Men's voices, laughter, the sound of work being done. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing. Her knees weren't what they used to be. When she reached her old bedroom, the room David and Vanessa had given her before she moved to the guest house, she stopped. The door was open. Inside, 2 workers were measuring windows, their toolboxes spread across the floor. Paint samples lined the dresser. "Oh, hello ma'am," one of them said, friendly enough. "We're just getting started on the renovation." Margaret smiled politely, though confusion flickered through her. "Renovation? Yes ma'am. The lady of the house wants this room completely redone. New floors, new windows, fresh paint. Going to be beautiful when we're done." Margaret nodded slowly. She didn't want to embarrass anyone by admitting she knew nothing about this. "That's wonderful," she said softly. When did this get planned?" "She called us last week, said they needed it done before they moved in." Before they moved in. The words settled strange in Margaret's chest. She thanked the workers and made her way to the guest house. She sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window where afternoon light pooled warm and golden. She thought about those words. Moved in. That room, her room, was being prepared for someone. But who? That evening, Vanessa came by with dinner, as she sometimes did. Chicken casserole, still warm. "Vanessa, dear," Margaret said gently, "I came through the house today. So workers in the upstairs bedroom." Vanessa's smile was bright. Almost too bright. "Oh, yes. We're doing some renovations. Want to freshen things up, you know? The house could use some love before we really settle in." Margaret searched her daughter-in-law's face. "Before you settle in? Well, you know what I mean. Make it feel more like ours." Vanessa kissed her cheek. "I should run. David's working late tonight." But something had shifted. Margaret felt it the way you feel autumn coming before the leaves turn. The next morning, Margaret woke to chaos. Sirens, shouting, blue and red lights flashing through her curtains. She wrapped her robe tight and hurried outside. Police cars filled the driveway. Officers were at the main house door. David stood on the lawn in his work clothes, face pale with shock. And Vanessa was screaming. "Why is the police knocking on our door? What's happening? David, what did you do?" Margaret moved closer, her heart hammering. A police officer stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Vanessa Harper, we have a warrant for your arrest for insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit elder exploitation." The words hit like stones. Vanessa's face went white, then red. "That's insane. I haven't done anything." But the officer continued, reading rights that Margaret heard as if through water. David stood frozen, staring at his wife as if seeing a stranger. Margaret's mind raced backward. The renovation. The careful questions Vanessa had asked months ago about Margaret's life insurance policy. The gentle suggestions that Margaret update her will. The room being prepared before we move in, but who exactly was meant to move in? Later, after Vanessa had been taken away, after the police had left and neighbors had retreated to whisper behind curtains, David sat with his mother in her small kitchen. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice cracked. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Margaret held his hand, the way she'd done when he was small and scared. "Tell me what you learned." David's story spilled out slowly, painfully. A detective had contacted him at work that morning. They'd been investigating Vanessa for months. She'd been involved in a scheme finding elderly relatives, slowly isolating them, taking out insurance policies, making them dependent. The room upstairs wasn't being renovated for decoration. According to emails the police found, Vanessa had been planning to move her mother into Margaret's guest house and move Margaret into that upstairs room, where she would be easier to monitor. Margaret felt cold despite the warm day. "There's more," David whispered. She was having an affair with a man she met through the scheme. They were partners. The betrayal ran deep, through David, through trust, through the fabric of the family Margaret had tried to build. But Margaret Harper had survived worse than betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Margaret did something she'd learned long ago. She chose kindness where others might choose bitterness. She held David while he grieved the marriage he thought he'd had. She helped him find a therapist. She cooked meals and listened and didn't say, "Told you so," even though she'd felt something was wrong. For herself, Margaret did something else. She contacted the detective and asked to testify. She told the truth about the questions, the paperwork, the strange renovation. Her testimony helped. It mattered. Vanessa was convicted. The affair partner fled, but was eventually caught. David filed for divorce, and Margaret, she stayed in her guest house, tending her garden. David visited more now, helping with the heavy work, sitting on the porch in the evenings. One Saturday morning, 6 months later, David brought coffee and sat beside her. "Mom, I've been thinking, that upstairs room, the one they were renovating, would you help me turn it into something good? Maybe a library, or a craft room you could use when you visit?" Margaret smiled. "I'd like that." She'd learned something in 68 years that she wanted David to learn too, that betrayal doesn't have to poison everything, that love sometimes means protecting people from those who would harm them, that revenge isn't about bitterness sometimes. It's simply about standing up and speaking truth. The room that had been meant for her imprisonment became a space filled with books and light, and the quiet sound of pages turning. And Margaret, who had been seen as just an obstacle, just someone in the way, proved that the wisdom of years carries its own power. She was nobody's victim. She was a woman who chose to survive, to testify, to forgive her son, and to help him heal. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, choosing life, choosing kindness, and refusing to let cruelty win. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply refuse to become what hurt us. Sometimes justice wears a gentle face, and sometimes love means protecting those we care about, even when it breaks our hearts to do it.